Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome you once again this evening to the airwaves of Salam Media. It is Wednesday nights with myself, Inat Wadi, as we continue our Wednesday evening programming, taking a detailed look at issues and events right across the entire world. And the last few weeks, we still have been focusing on Gaza, and we will continue for a very, very long time because the genocide is unfolding by the day, by the hour, by the minute, and in its most brutal form. And many of us are actually being haunted by the screams of people being burnt alive. And this happened a few days ago, and we've seen international reaction. We've seen the disgust at the brutality of this Zionist regime and the extent and the extreme measures that they would go to continue killing, murdering the people of Palestine and continuing with this genocide. And while all of this is still going on, there's still a lot of focus in the background, particularly looking at South Africa. We've seen reports this week about Aaron Bayhek, the young South African serving in the IDF, a sniper, and a unit that had killed about close on to 100 people. And this is an issue that has come up in the past as well with regards to the National Prosecution Authority. 15 years ago, dockets were handed with regards to South Africans serving in the IDF. And we know of late a lot more is taking place. And I think it's going to take a matter of about a week or two where we are actually awaiting an executive summary that is going to be released on expanding the terrorism probe and genocide. So all of this still to come, and it is something that we need to continue talking about, but at the same time, we need to continue putting pressure on our very own authorities, on the South African government, to do something about these soldiers that are serving in the IDF. And the question we are raising this evening is, what should the repercussions be for South Africans serving in the IDF? We've assembled quite a panel this evening. We've got Paul Hendler, Anti-Zionist Jewish South African. We've got Umayya Theba, a journalist and an activist. Also Martin Jansen, the PSC committee member, and Yousha Tayob, attorney. All of them coming on screen right now. And we're waiting on Yousha. I see Yousha is coming in as well. To all of you, Assalamu alaikum, welcome, and I appreciate your time this evening right here on Salam Media.
Walaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum to you and the viewers.
Yes, Paul, I'd like to actually begin with you. And, obviously we are seeing this genocide unfolding in the most brutal manner. And I just want to spend a few minutes, particularly looking at the last few days where we've seen the disgust, we've seen the horror with which the IDF has brutally now taken this genocide to another level of actually burning people alive. And this has created international reaction, and particularly looking at the IDF, the brutality with which it is now taking this genocide. And we know a lot of focus is on Lebanon right now, but Gaza still continues to burn.
Yeah, I think you're referring to an attack on one of the hospitals in the last day or two, where people were actually burnt alive in the wards, and then just before that, we had this report by this Palestinian journalist Yousha, telling us about the so-called ghost unit and its execution, which you mentioned earlier, of up to 100 people in ways that clearly violate the principle of distinction in international humanitarian law. And one of the things that sort of struck me is that there's a continuity here, even though things are intensifying in their horror. There's a continuity here with past horrors. You know, the Goldstone report back in 2008-9, Operation Cast Lead, talks about a similar red line established by IDF forces and its snipers against Palestinians who don't know that where that red line is when civilians are walking in the street. So, in a way, it's not new, qualitatively speaking, what's happening, but it's happening on such a horrifically expanded scale compared to the past. And the ghost unit itself doesn't announce its presence. So it's an added sort of arbitrariness that a civilian in Gaza takes their life into for that reason also. And then finally, the journalist Tiravi refers to a procedure permitting open fire on everybody who is seen as being above a given military age. Again, nothing new with the IDF, and in fact, it's an interesting analogy with the United States drone killings in Iraq and Afghanistan, where they made similar assumptions. So I think what I'm really trying to say is there's a continuity here qualitatively, and I think the numbers have just grown exponentially. We've never seen this immediate sort of killings, numbers of people killed in earlier genocidal moments.
Thank you for that, Paul. Martin, let's bring you into the discussion, and just following up from what Paul is talking about, all red lines being crossed, nothing new. And although we've seen this in the past, but now we are starting to see this genocide unfolding in real time, and particularly in the digital age. And when we look at social media, it's actually horrific where we've seen the reaction to these latest rounds of aggression, and particularly when you see people being burnt alive, when you hear the screams actually, which are actually starting to haunt people, and the world is now waking up to the reality, to the fact as to how brutal this genocide is in real time.
Look, I think the world did wake up a while back relative to what's happened over the past year. I think late last year, I think the majority of the world's people were clearly aware of what was going on and Israel's genocidal actions. And of course, we know that that's gotten worse and worse over the last few months. So I think probably, I suspect what you're referring to are the powers that be in the world, the governments, particularly the most powerful ones of the West. They might be waking up, but I don't think it's a question of waking up. I think they are complicit and have been complicit all along, particularly the USA. The US, it's quite obvious to me, has been supporting Israel from the start in this genocidal activity. The fact that, I mean, we know that the Biden regime has been giving Israel unlimited amounts of arms, these huge bombs, what do they call them? Bunker busters that destroy hundreds of lives at a time, indicates to me that there's no kind of waking up. I suspect the recent utterances of the US about warnings to Israel that if they don't improve the situation of civilians in Gaza, they will withhold arms, and they've given Israel 30 days deadline. I suspect that that's probably got a lot to do with the American elections that are coming up in about 30 days' time, interestingly. And I think the Democratic Party is hoping that that would provide them some kind of favoritism or favorable viewing by the younger generation of Americans who will cast their votes for their candidate. I think it's more to do with that than that possibly they might be waking up to the reality about them being complicit and international law and the consequences, etc. I don't think the US cares about that, actually. They've shown over many years, many decades, that they have no respect for international law. They kill at will. They massacre people. Their racism comes through very clearly. We know about the Vietnamese. We know about people in Latin America, in Africa, etc. Millions of lives they've destroyed over decades. They don't care. And Israel is their bastion, their security bastion in the Middle East, to secure their dominance and control and ensure that the resources of the Middle East remain dominated by them and Western companies, particularly in the area of petroleum. So I don't think there's any waking up. I think it's just a kind of tactical nuance for now until the US elections. And I think Israel will continue with its genocidal campaign. And it probably will allow in some food supplies, but it will kind of be, again, a drip feeding arrangement. And it will continue to massacre people in Gaza. And of course, the severe attacks in the West Bank and its attack on Lebanon will continue. So that's my view of that.
Thank you for that, Martin. Yousha, to bring you into the discussion. And as Martin says, that the US doesn't care. Israel, we know this is a state that is gone rogue, that wouldn't give a care at all. We've seen the arrogance of the Israeli military. We've seen the arrogance of Benjamin Netanyahu. And you and I, Yousha, had this discussion in the past, and looking at obviously even the ICJ, where at that point in time, we were not optimistic, particularly with regard to the provisional measures that were issued by the ICJ that Israel needs to take heed to as well. And that hasn't happened. And the reality is on the ground that since the ICJ ruling, matters have actually gone worse.
Gee, thanks, Inayat. Yeah, so we had that discussion. I mean, everybody was hopeful, but unfortunately, the results are, and I think Martin makes a pertinent point. Is we're not just dealing with Israel; we're dealing with the superpowers of the world, and this is where it's at. And it gets even worse because the ICC warrant is also ignored. So, but and it's got a color to it as well because it's enforced against non-white accused, but not against others who are protected. But yeah, we've had the discussion. But the other is, and I don't want to control this discussion, but it's the sway that we see as a contradiction. I mean, we make this big noise at the ICJ, but we don't implement local legislation. We do nothing about the evidence that I and another attorney and other people have presented to the NPA. And it's this double speak, it's this double standard that has continuously troubled us. When we see the double standard on Ukraine and the double standard on Israel, it opened a lot of eyes that they occurred almost at the same time. But unfortunately, we're seeing this disconnect in our own government, in our own NPA, in our own police services. So I don't know where we're headed. We make this big noise publicly, but we can't deal with the evidence that is presented to them on a local level. And we've been making the noise since 2008, 2009. We have specific instances, and the very worrisome part is, just last week, I had a client who was raided, presumably for terrorist-related activities, and they quote the Foreign Military Assistance Act in the warrant relating to a financial transaction in 2017. So there clearly appears to be a will to utilize the act because the American and other Western masters are ordering them to do so. But they're not willing to do it for the Jewish people in this country, and I just can't explain the reasoning. So it is a huge contradiction. There's a huge contradiction. want to accept the title South African, that's an argument for another day. But it's a hugely embarrassing situation to want to be at the ICJ and not prosecute locally when the evidence is presented to you. So, yeah, I don't know if I'm digressing from where you want this discussion to go, but that's the angle we take right now. We've given you evidence since 2008. Big noise at The Hague, but nothing here. Why not?
Well, Yousha, this is exactly where we are going to be taking this discussion, so I don't think you are digressing in any way whatsoever. And just to get to talk to with Umayya, because Umayya, Yousha talks about local legislation, and we know that you've been at the forefront as well at the time when, apart from just, and we are going to go to the IDF, to the South African serving in the IDF, but also locally, you were present when the case of Brenda Howard's, actually when she first appeared in court as well. And, since then, we've heard very little. And again, the point that Yousha is making in terms of weak, even in implementing legislation on a local level. We know the whole issue surrounding the South African serving in the IDF is a serious matter, but also in terms of people locally, people like Brenda Howard as well. And just your thoughts, because I know you have followed the case, you were present in court as well, and people have been asking what has happened, what has the outcome been?
Yes, indeed. If I follow on from what Yousha said, I agree 100%. We have to call out our government's hypocrisy. You call it what it is. You can't go to the ICJ, take a case against Israel to the highest court, and then you don't take the necessary action on a local level. So, why is the Israeli embassy still open? I heard that South Africa is even still supplying coal to Israel. What is going to happen with the arrest of South Africans who have participated in the IDF? We need real action. We can't have a president who talks the talk at the UN, but there is no action. Former Minister Naledi Pandor was talking in Pretoria this past weekend, again saying how much we owe to the president, because if it was not for him, the case would not have gone to the ICJ. And that's all good and well, but it's time for other action, more harsh action. Following on from what Paul said about red lines, if I quote from the IOL article, paragraph that says, one member of the battalion, a 22-year-old man, told the documentary crew that there is a line that Palestinians do not know about. Anyone in his line of sight would be shot. He said, anyone of military age walking near the bombardment is a terrorist. Now, this may or may not be Aaron Bayhak, the South African, but, we have seen that the IDF is targeting anyone, not just people of military age. We look at the case of little 6-year-old Hind Rajab. They knew that the ambulance from the Red Cross Society was on their way to a 6-year-old girl. They had gotten permission from the IDF to approach her, and still they killed her. They shot 355 bullets at a 6-year-old girl who at that age has no clue why she's in this situation to begin with. Let's talk about the US elections. Yes, they are starting to change their tune, but it's a little too late. I think that young people cannot be swayed. We don't have short-term memory. We've seen what has happened over the past year. And so many young people have woken up. Young Jewish people are standing firmly against what the Zionist regime is pushing. Whether you vote for Biden, Kamala Harris, or you vote for Donald Trump, it's two shoes of the same pair, right? It's just soft Zionism and hard Zionism, and you just need to choose one of them. But I think young people are actually learning or have figured out that there is a third option, and I'm hoping that a lot of young people in America vote for Dr. Joel Stein. We have to think very carefully as a society what the repercussions will be for Aaron Bayhak. I have my own ideas, and I hope that we see some action from our government.
Paul, Umayya says young people being swayed. And I'm just looking at it from a perspective where we're talking about Aaron Bayhek now. Now, this is a young 22-year-old South African and barely out of school, barely out of university. But young people are being swayed because at a young age of 22, being a member of a ghost unit, a sniper unit, tells us that we have forces working within this country that are influencing and that are impacting on young people like Aaron Bayhek to join the IDF to be part and parcel of a genocidal military apparatus to the extent that even, he's just one of them. The other day when we've heard about the attack from Lebanon, the drone attack at the Israeli military base as well. When you look at the ages of the people, when you look at how young some of these people that were killed, 18, 19-year-olds, and young people seem to be the target to be part and parcel of this brutal military apparatus.
Yes, Inayet, there's a whole socialization process that you go through in South Africa, not only in South Africa, but speaking for myself in South Africa, you go through from a very young age as a Jewish person, and Israel becomes central to your identity as a Jew, and the rest of the world becomes an anti-Semitic threat that you need to have the state to run for cover, okay? And this is something that's actually very highly organized and structured. So if you look at the SA Zionist Federation, which is the proxy for the state of Israel in South Africa, I did a sort of organizational chart of all their members, okay? From the religious organizations, both Reform and Orthodox, through to the youth movements, both religious and secular, Zionist youth movements, through to voluntary organizations like the JNF and the Morgan David Adom, the sort of Red Cross equivalent, and there are many others that one can add in also. The SA Zionist Federation sits at the center of this, and it controls it. The educational institutions, the Jewish educational institutions, I think it's called the Federation of Jewish Schools or something in South Africa, also an affiliate. And we came across, I think I may have chatted to you about this on an earlier show. We came across, I think it was, Martin can remind me, I think it was almost a year ago, a video where one of the top teachers at Herzliya School in Cape Town was talking about alumni who, left and went on Aliyah to Israel, and something like 20% of them joined the Israeli army. And when we set up a petition against this, calling for an investigation, because this is violating at least the Regulation of Foreign Military Assistance Act and another 3 pieces of local legislation also. Before that petition got shut down by the petition platform, that's how far the power of these people reach. I don't think any of us here are surprised to hear that we know that. But before it got shut down, we had an interesting comment from one of the alumni, because there are quite a lot of unhappy alumni from Herzliya who've seen the light. And this comment spoke about how the IDF people arrive in civilian clothes on the campus as part of their recruitment, and how videos are shown which are akin to sort of video games, with our I remember my son in his very early teens used to play PlayStation games, which are quite dangerous, where you play with your friends and you're hunting so-called funny-looking people, I presume terrorists in inverted commas, and how jokes are made with videos that show this. And one of the comments that this man made was, and Herzliya is mild. We've heard stories from King David that are far more egregious, you know. So I think there's the family, of course, where socialization takes place. Aaron Bayok, I think is his name, apparently matriculated from King David. And I think that's part of where you get socialized into this identity of the Jew and the other, and Israel being the equivalent of being Jewish and in fact being able to survive as a Jew, and you sort of set yourself up in this type of ethno-nationalist paranoia almost, us against the rest of the world.
Yes, thank you for the poll. Martin, as Paul said, we had this discussion in the past as well. But again, when we look at the, as Paul mentions, we're talking about a highly organized lobby that is operating within South Africa to the extent that young people are indoctrinated to hate, to kill. I mean, Paul speaks about video games, he speaks about PlayStation games, but we're not shocked that this is happening because we know right across the entire world how powerful the Zionist lobby is. And we speak about the US, we speak about the elections that are taking place in the United States. We know the huge influence they have on both the Republicans and also on the Democrats, on Kamala and on Donald Trump. So we are not shocked, but the mere fact that we have this highly organized lobby group operating within our borders, and we seem to be helpless, unable to do anything, unable to stop people like Aaron, leaving our shores, being part of this ghost unit, and obviously being part and parcel of this genocide.
I'm having technical problems. I didn't get everything that you asked, Inyat. I think the audio problems, but I did pick up the question of the Israeli lobby and the power of the Israeli lobby. I think it's obvious to all of us that it's extremely powerful, and part of the power is reliant on the fact that Israel plays a strategic, political, and economic role for US and Western imperialism in the Middle East and generally in the world too, right? So there's a convergence of interest. So it has fertile ground to achieve quite a lot in terms of Israel's political aims and ensuring its continued existence and growth and expansion, and continuing its genocide of the Palestinians, which, as we know, started at least 8 decades ago, right? Ilan Papi referred to it as an incremental genocide. What we're seeing now is an intensification of the genocide over the last year. And what's quite astounding is how influential this lobby is. If we just look at it from a different angle, people's views of, let's say, so-called terrorist groups or gangs, violent gangs around the world. If you take, for example, our position or views of the Burmese regime in relation to the Rohingya, or Mexican and Colombian drug cartels, or the terror of ISIS in Syria and Iraq, etc., etc. Now, of course, all of these groups, entities, organizations, regimes have committed horrific crimes, right? And our views of them are probably reasonably accurate from a political or moral or ethical perspective, and we oppose them, right? But how do you explain then that a regime like Israel, which for 8 decades has committed arguably much worse atrocities to the Palestinian people and the people of the Middle East, and yet it's seen, in a fairly decent light. It's even argued, it's even said that it's the only democracy in the Middle East, for example. And yet, even now, if you just look at the mainstream media, it's still portrayed as that, as some kind of decent, humane regime that's part of the international community, etc., etc. And we can see then that this has got a lot to do with media. If you look at Hollywood and the films that Hollywood has produced over the last 6 decades at least, both before the Second World War and after, but more intense after, there are more films about the Holocaust of Jewish people in Europe than any other group in the world, as far as I'm aware, right? No mention about the Roma people who were also killed in the thousands, socialists or communists, trade unionists who were also killed and massacred by the Nazis, etc. But the Jews are highlighted as the most important group, and the worst atrocities were committed against them. And I'm not suggesting that that it shouldn't be covered in the media or in our history, etc. But we can see what is at play here. So there's Hollywood, of course, many films, even up to now, films about the Holocaust are still being produced. And then, of course, the news outlets. Every day we can see how BBC, CNN portrays, Zionist Israeli people in relation to the Palestinians. The Israelis are humanized all the time. The Palestinians is very distant. They just, people being killed as if they, animals there ready for the slaughter. So it's interesting how this Zionist lobby is able to influence not only the politicians in Congress, and we know that the majority of them are supported in their campaigns for election. So there's a strong dependency of US politicians on this lobby and other lobbies as well. And it's all legal. Here we would say it's corruption, it's bribery. And then, as I said, the media. And this is constant. We're bombarded with this all the time. And the Palestinians are dehumanized in the present situation. So we need to have a look at how we can strategize to overcome all the areas that this lobby is influential in. And I believe that mass movements in America, that's been a great start, with particularly young people, people who've historically been oppressed, Black people, Latinos in America joining and seeing for now the true face, the horror of US imperialism, which affects them at home as well. So I think that's a good start. And the other area, of course, is the media. And very importantly, and what's been disappointing about the new South Africa is education, particularly around the education of history. We tried doing some work with grade 11 students a few years ago, and we were appalled at how the Middle East and Israel and Palestine is being portrayed. There's this notion of neutrality, and the main thing that gets taught, in grade 11 and history generally, is how to understand and see bias in the way history is written, and very little about the history is being taught itself. So we need to look at all of those areas and work at it, and particularly pressurize our government to change, to get towards a situation of real transformation in this country, politically, in every sphere of life, and in this case, particularly education. And of course, our media also needs serious transformation. It's really been bad about covering the SABC, the public broadcaster, has been really bad about covering what's happening to the Palestinians at the moment.
Well, thank you for that, Martin. I see Yousha. I'm not too sure whether Yousha has gone off.
I'm here.
Once again.
I'm here.
Yousha, I'd just like to focus a bit on how selective is our government, are our prosecuting authorities, and justice ministry in applying the law, in applying legislation. And the reason why I am raising this issue is the mere fact that there have been dockets that have been lying for 15 years with the NPA that have not even been touched. And if one compares the case of Aaron Bayhek, and we know in the past there have been instances where people were linked to organizations like ISIS, the Tulsi twins. As we speak right now, there is a couple in solitary confinement. I think there's a woman by the name of Fatima Patel and her husband that are in solitary confinement in Durban as well under certain terror legislation. And the question is, how different is this now with the case of Aaron Bayhek, and are we being selective in applying legislation when it comes to matters like these?
It certainly appears to do so. Sorry, man, I was going to do this very early. Paul, we've spoken 1,000 times on the phone. We've never met. Nice to meet you. Martin, I've seen your name on lots of papers. Finally, good to see you. Umayya, I don't know it all, but I lost you somehow. The connection went bad. I don't know if she answered the Brenda Hurwitz's question. It is ongoing. I just don't have the dates in front of me. But I can let you have that tonight. So that case is not gone away yet. We're doing whatever we can to get it to started. So, returning to your question, in regard to the selective prosecution, it certainly appears to be so. Like I say to you, last week, a search and seizure warrant was executed on a Muslim man, and there is clear reference in that warrant to Section 3 of the Foreign Military Assistance Act. And so, in that, and it's a Hawks matter. It's a PCLU, it's the head of prosecutions, it's the big boys. The same big boys that we met in 2008 and 2009. And we identified 73 individuals. We identified 2 police stations, Norwood and Sandringham, as training grounds, and nothing was done. So for me, it is very clear. It's a selective prosecution. Whether it's lobbying, whether it's some other legal mind sitting back and saying, we don't have sufficient evidence on this one, and therefore. Whatever it is. In the 80s, there was a little loophole in the Films and Publications Act, and I remember going somewhere near Collett Drive to watch a movie called A Dry White Season. Marlon Brando played the part of the senior counsel, and I forget the name of the actor, but it was a white gentleman who portrayed Donald Woods as the editor, and they were dealing with the Stephen Bantu Biko matter. And at a point, the editor says to Marlon Brando, as the senior counsel in the matter, in all of the world, the law and justice are distant cousins. And in South Africa, they're not even on speaking terms. And remember, this was in the 80s when we were at the height of our struggle. And it would seem very much to me, and I've been at pains to explain to the Muslim community that believes that this government has its interests at heart. We're too small to matter. But to think that this government has Muslim interests at heart is ridiculous. And the starting point, I mean, Umayya, before I lost connection, heard her saying that it's time. I'm asking you, how does an organization like the South African Zionist Federation exist in this country? Considering our history, considering the UN declaration of the measurement of apartheid equating to Zionism, considering that we take the matter to the ICJ, how does an organization like that sit at the center of what Paul describes as a monopoly on everything? The Jewish National Fund, raising funds. It's simple, United. All we asked them to do was go and investigate one of the 73 suspects, take him in for questioning, ask him for his passport, ask him for his dual nationality passport. Paul and Martin are very well versed on how the procedure works. We've got the evidence. I mean, as a Muslim, you're commanded to do justice even if it be upon yourself. This was the hope that we had in the 80s when we were fighting for freedom. This is where comrades stood together, going to prison, getting tortured, being questioned, having families torn apart. All of these things, we were there. We were there. What is the Zionist Federation even doing here? What did Mandela miss? What did he miss? How can it exist? How can people whose children fight and commit this genocide be allowed to sit in their homes and say, we don't take responsibility? You're talking about a 22-year, you're not talking about indoctrination. You're talking about, on the evidence by a very thorough investigation, of a 22-year-old in this as a sniper in a ghost unit. How talented must you be? And by the way, you used South African resources. You used the Norwood police station. You used the Sandringham police station and other places that we didn't find. What's going on here, United? I mean, is this a country worth living in? Is this a country worth voting for? Is this a government worth endorsing? What nonsense! What absolute nonsense! Let's teach them the laws of Allah, and let's teach them justice according to the laws of Allah. Let's teach them that. There's no contradiction there. The standard of justice is the same. Do it even if it be against your own self. How come? How come the Zionist Federation existed for all of Mandela's existence? How? Here's Paul. He's pointing to the Zionist Federation as the center. As the center. No, but we don't want to break bones. Diplomacy, decency, people will learn. What drives people to these extremes, United? What? Lawfare. How many dockets you want to count? Come to the office. Ask Paul and Martin. They also deposing to affidavits, compiling dockets, clear evidence, photographs, placing you at the scene in uniform. What more do you want? What more do you want? So that's where I'm at. I'm in a complete loss. I'm at a complete loss. And that's why when you interviewed me on the ICJ application, I was so skeptical. And unfortunately, the desired results haven't shown themselves. So I don't know. I just don't know where we're headed. I mean, and presumably there'll be a lot more 17 and 22-year-olds based on what Paul was saying earlier about the indoctrination and the fact that but all of them, they all do the same, all colonizers. You know, I mean, they steal wealth, they use other people's money to pay for their soldiers and their luxuries. I don't know, Inait. I don't know where we're going with this discussion, but clearly there's double speak, there's double standards. I mean, we've always complained about the US's double standards. And we're seeing it from our own government, unfortunately, and it's real. I mean, it's not. You don't have to search far. Just come to my office. Coffee's free. I'll show you the dockets. I'll show you the evidence, and you leave and see what we've got. It's clear. It's clear. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what else to talk about. I mean, I thought this thing was about the Foreign Military Act and the Mercenaries Act, and I had it ready to be the most boring person on the interview tonight, reading statutes. But the fact of the matter is, this government is going nowhere. It's a double speak. It's a double standard, and it's the same double standards that we fought against. Why a standard for white people and why a standard for black people and half a standard for colored and half a standard for Indian? Why? It's the same thing, man. It's the same thing. You've lost us. You've lost us, and you. I mean, what a joke. I mean, sorry, man. What a joke, ICJ. Really, what an absolute joke. Who's funding it, man? I want my tax money back. I want a refund. I want a refund of any of my tax money that went to that matter. It's a waste of time, man. Sorry, somebody else.
Well, Yousha, I hear your frustration, and Umayya, you know, I see you smiling, you're shaking, you're nodding your head as well at what Yousha is saying. But clearly, you know, for someone like yourself as well, who's been an activist, who's been at the forefront of many a protest, many a march as well, I'm sure just following up from what Yousha is saying, pretty demoralizing at this point in time.
Indeed. You know, well said, Yousha, because those are my sentiments exactly. You know, the day that the ICJ ruling was made, I cried. I was so happy. And unfortunately, months later, and I don't see any form of action because the US and Israel, they're all above the law. They don't even recognize the ICJ, really. But we're here to talk about Aaron Bayhack, right? So we talk about young people and what should happen to someone like that who has or who is an extension of a war criminal, because Yoav Gallant will soon have, hopefully, an arrest warrant out for him. So anyone participating in the IDF is an extension of that, and they themselves are then war criminals. We look at the behavior of these young delinquents, burning, blowing up places of worship, places where the most vulnerable of people are, orphanages, refugee camps. Who does that? What kind of young people did we grow up in this country who at 22, I mean, you're born into freedom. So do you have no regard for freedom? Like what goes on in the head of a young person like that? I just don't understand. But if our government doesn't do something to let something serious to punish these crimes, what sort of message does that actually send? It's a dangerous message, letting other South Africans know that serious crimes are not punished and you can get away with it. And ultimately, we will lose faith in any kind of faith in the justice system. And, I personally would hate to be in the company of someone seated at a restaurant and the person next to me has been a baby killer. What are the other repercussions for our country having such a person back here? They are a danger to society. What sort of context do they have with groups, and how can they recruit other South Africans into their ideology? What sort of impact will it have on society going forward? I don't understand. Like Yousha, I'm at a loss for words, and I honestly think this person needs to get life imprisonment. There is no room for rehabilitation for this kind of thing. I feel that someone like this should be completely banned from international travel, should probably not even be allowed back into the country. Should this person, if he has dual citizenship, should he be stripped of South African citizenship? Can that even happen? But I think, some people like this cause further unrest by polarizing society. And so, again, serious action is needed on the part of our government. No more talking, no more hypocrisy. And if you're going to go to the ICJ, then you better follow up and reaffirm your stance through other actions.
Thank you for that, Umayya. Paul, just getting back to you, it is clear, and we're hearing it right across from all our panelists this evening, that we have a problem. We have a huge problem in this country. We've identified the problem. We speak out against this problem. We protest. We do everything we can. But at the end of the day, when a problem is not addressed, where does this leave us as a society in South Africa?
I'm reminded of the looting and crowded uprising and lootings in mainly KwaZulu-Natal and parts of Gauteng in 2021. Where what we're hearing here about the breakdown of faith in a broken type of justice system, is part of people being pushed to the limit. I mean, the levels of poverty and suffering amongst a huge chunk of South African households, if not the majority, exacerbated by the lockdown also, are part of that process of being pushed to the limit. And when you start seeing what my other panelists have called the double standards, and when you see it in the ANC, let's call a thing by its name here, not say just this government, which has had this almost aura around it. I think there's a breakdown of consensus and more social fragmentation, and all of this works its way out through more antisocial acts. And in a situation like that, and I think Umayya's questions are quite pertinent. In a situation like that, and in a changing world, world where the geopolitical shifts are moving decidedly against U.S. imperialism, the empire gets desperate, and its sub-empire, Israel, plays already quite a rogue state support for repressive regimes from Latin America through Africa, through its sort of securitization systems and its arms dealers, and causes quite a lot of further fragmentation. So I think Umayya, your questions are quite critically important. Where we go from here, I want to go back to something that Martin referred to. I don't think there's like an immediate type of answer, but I do think the building of mass movement outside, and that doesn't happen overnight, but it also happens much quicker than one thinks sometimes, where people are under such pressure. And I think Martin referred to work that he and some of our other comrades have done with scholars in the education system around history teaching. Some of us are talking out here in the Western Cape countryside to smaller groups of activists to try and build up that core, that can organize and expand into more sort of mass movements that we also saw the potential of back in the 1980s in South Africa, because that is really the force that will, I think, provide a motive for some change in the political system. It will impact on it in ways that I can't sit here and predict how, but I think that is, where the energies of what we are doing also need to be going. Not to say that the work around prosecuting these volunteers, lone soldiers as they call themselves, is not relevant. It's highly relevant, but it's something that is also important educational material for people on the ground to know about. And my experience is that there's a lot of hunger for this, on the ground.
Yes, Martin, earlier on you spoke about the media, and we know that the Palestine solidarity movements are very, very powerful in this country, the PSC. We've seen all the other Palestine solidarity movements, obviously making a lot of noise, doing a lot. But again, when it comes to a case like this with Aaron Bayhak, where we see with the mainstream media, the failure, because this should actually be making headline news in mainstream media, which we see is not the case. And at Salam Media, not very long ago, we had the pleasure of having a world-renowned journalist, Yumna Al-Said, in South Africa. She reached out to mainstream media for the very reason that you mentioned. Our media needs to be educated on the harsh realities and the stark realities on what is happening on the ground in Palestine. In November, we will be getting another journalist coming through, Hamza Chalan, audiovisual, and he's going to bring the realities of this genocide once again. And it's not that the media has not been exposed to the realities on the ground, but what we see, this blatant disregard and this failure, they hear you out the day you have a press briefing or a press conference or an interview in the studios, and that's as far as it goes. But we don't see them taking this to another level.
Yeah, I fully agree. But I think part of the problem here in South Africa is that we haven't come to grips fully with the Zionists in this country and their institutions and the role that they play, and we haven't effectively dealt with them, right? I think just firstly, it's quite obvious to all of us that organizations like the SA Zionist Federation and the other ancillary ones and the role that they play, if you just look at what's it, Chief Rabbi Goldstein, he actually went to visit the soldiers and gave them gifts and praised them for their work in executing the genocide, right? So what we can clearly say is that the Zionist organizations and the Zionists in South Africa are part of an international terrorist network, okay? If you look at this special sniper unit, they come from several countries all over the world. You have the same Zionist formations in countries like Canada. Of course, we know about the US, but similarly in France, Germany, even in countries in Latin America. And of course, they've infiltrated in Africa as well. We've seen the debates at the AU about allowing Israel observer status, etc. So this is an international terrorist network controlled by the Israeli regime, and they are fascist network, right? So we need to see them clearly as that, and then we need to act against them in whatever way we can, whether it's protest action, whether it's what referred to as direct action, and of course our lawfare. And I think for now, our lawfare needs to be taken to a higher level. We need to invest much, much more in it to challenge the institutions in this country, like the NPA, like government ministries, including education. How is it that, Herzliya schools and King David and so on, can continue to promote views and ideology and activities that go completely against, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights? How is it that that can be allowed? Now, just imagine the converse of that. Let's say, I don't know, some right-wing Christian group or Muslim group, so-called Islamic Jihad group or whatever, were to do exactly the same as they're doing. Or for example, let's say we want to send young men to go and fight in Lebanon to oppose the Zionists. It's obvious that this state will not allow it. Look at the case of the Tulsi twins. Right? So the role that this government is playing is clearly a political role that is in many ways complicit with Zionism. And we must call it that. For me, there's no question about it. And part of the reason for that is the political economy of this government and the role of Zionist influence business, big business. Let's take the example of Philip Kravitz, for example. Let me just give you an illustration of how it operates and the influence. So Philip Kravitz is the founder, the main owner of Cape Union Mart, a very big company, over 100 stores in this country, even now in Namibia, in Southern Africa, etc. Right? So we tackle Philip Kravitz for his I don't know how many decades long support of Israel, sending funds to Israel. He got an award for it, etc. Unconditionally supporting the Zionist regime. We made demands, A, that he must stop that. B, he must call for an immediate ceasefire. C, our other demand was that he must give the equivalent of funds that he gave to the Israeli institutions. He must give to the Palestinians. Okay? Nothing extraordinary. Basic kind of humane demands on our part. He refused, but what he did even prior to that, he contacted the union that organizes the workers at his factories, right? And that union is the Southern African Clothing and Textile Workers Union, which is a member, it's an affiliate of COSATU. They obviously met, and their supposed concern now is that the impact of the boycott, our boycott call on against Cape Union Mart, will have on jobs. And what happens? The union, through COSATU, pressurizes us to meet with Cape Union Mart and to have some kind of compromise arrangement, effectively to dilute or to call off the boycott, so that Cape Union Mart won't be affected and workers won't lose their jobs. So you see what I'm saying? The kind of economic clout that even able to influence a union that is supposed to be progressive, part of COSATU, that has adopted resolutions against Israel supporting Palestine for many decades, and yet this union does this and effectively sides with the company that's a Zionist supporter and supporter of the genocide. My response to the union at the time, and even now, why is it that they're not educating their members about what's happening, and maybe even go on strike to force Kravitz to change his position? So what I'm really raising is the influence of the link between the politics and the economics, that Kravitz was able to do that. Now imagine this at the national level, where many of our government leaders are integrated into white monopoly capital, where, you know, the Zionists have great influence, whether it's Anglo-American or any of these big companies. And this is what's happening. So they are pulling the strings with our government leaders not to act decisively against Israel. For me, it is obvious. It can only be that.
Thank you, Martin. Yousha, we've seen in the last year with this genocide that has been unfolding in South Africa in particular, we've seen two major international conferences that have taken place. There was the one in Kurtuba and the other one took place at the Sandton Convention Center. And I think I even met you outside the Sandton Convention Center. And this is where we see high-level government officials coming, addressing these conferences, making utterances, making a lot of noises. But at the end of the day, that conference ends when the day that conference ends and everything else comes to a standstill. And here we are talking about high-ranking government officials, and we know with the foreign serving in a foreign military, there is a process to follow. There is a process with regard to getting permission from the likes of the Department of Defense. All of that is already enshrined in our legislation. And I've even seen the EFF issue a statement today questioning as to why Aaron Bayek was not prosecuted. Did he get the necessary permission to go and serve in a foreign military, easy in contravention of both domestic and international law? These are questions that are being raised. But again, coming to the point, we have these government officials at all these conferences. We applaud them, we give them standing ovations, but yet when it comes to practically applying the law, there is a problem.
Yeah, so Martin, I'm getting on in age, so memory is not so great. So Martin reminded me that in the 2008-2009 Gaza docket referral, when the NPA declined to prosecute, we brought a review application. And surprisingly, absolutely surprisingly, the then minister, Jeff Radebe, had met with the South African, I never get it right, JBD, BDJ, the Jewish board. I just never get their acronym right. But yeah, SJB or SBJ or whatever. Anyway, whatever, you know what I'm talking about. Insignificant acronym to me, be that as it may. So, in the review application, there was communication between the government department where the Gaza docket was actually discussed at a meeting held by this board at its offices, which is ridiculous. So, when Martin says, we don't matter, man. We don't matter. It all happens at another level. I'm all for changing history books. I'm all for education. I'm all for getting unions on board. But, the level of frustration is such that, a night or two ago, just coming out of the masjid after Isha, a fellow said to me, have you heard about the bad boy? And you know, the instinctive reaction is, yeah. But my reaction to him this time was, when he's already a fully trained sniper at 22. You're now in your 50s. What are you trained to do? When are you going to start your training? Because I respect what Paul is saying. I respect what Martin is saying. But there's also the military solution. I mean, Martin says, what would happen if Islamic Jihad? Maybe I must take him up on the invitation and call my brothers in Al-Qaeda and say, hey, South Africa's an okay base for you to start training. Let's see. They do nothing about the Jews. And if they start doing anything about our training camps, then we'll say there's unfair treatment, there's unequal treatment. Let's take Martin up on the invitation. I'll speak to the elders and see where we go with it. But we mustn't rule out the military situation, because this frustration that I'm feeling, Martin makes reference to lawfare. Our lawfare has gone nowhere. It's absolutely escalate to what level? Level that Jeff Radebe has already spoken to the president of the Jewish board. Ramaphosa has already invited to have tea with the Zionist Federation. We're going nowhere. We're insignificant. We don't have Ramaphosa's wealth. We have his color, or somewhat of it, but we don't have his wealth and his influence. We don't matter. We don't matter. When people were campaigning against not voting in the election, I said to them, you don't matter. Come to my office. I'll show you you don't matter. You don't matter. You don't matter. What are you voting for? Take the day off. Spend it with the family. You don't matter. You don't matter. We don't matter. Elite, you don't matter. Paul, you don't matter. Martin, you don't matter. Umayya, you don't matter. You don't matter. Get on with it. Get on with it. Why does my heart bleed to be in the middle of the jihad? Looking for every conceivable way to get there, because I'm tired of history books. I'm tired of education. I'm tired of unions. I'm up against a 22-year-old sniper. He's been training since he was 2. He's been trained since he was 2. Give me, Paul, no intention to offend all Jews. But how many have we now identified? How many have gone through our net? We got a recruiter. His name was Daza Greenberg. He would travel into the country regularly. We identified him. We told the police where he was. I don't know, man. I don't know. You force us into an extreme situation. You force us into an Al-Qaeda. You force us into a Hamas. We have no alternatives. Nobody wants to hear the conversation. Let me teach you about Islam. I teach you everything about Islam. You'll see the justice. You'll see that we grew up in that system. We know the history. We went to school. We heard about the Anglo-Boer War. We knew how tainted the whole story was. How the Zulus were the really bad antagonizers. We've read all about it. We grow up. We put the switch on. It's on. We know what's going on. Martin started with the US being the real perpetrator, the Great Western. We all know this. We all know this. Everybody knows it. Everybody knows it. Nobody's doing anything about it. And then the Tulsi twins want to make hijrah, which is not illegal. You're entitled to leave the country of your birth to go and do whatever you want. Prosecuted to the hilt. 9, 10 years of their lives gone. Another client going to face the music next week because of the state's definition of jihad. Oh, it's only violent. Yeah, you don't understand it. Constitution talks about freedom of religion. Well, hold on a second. Hold on a second. The Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam says, if you contribute to a jihad, you will enjoy in that jihad. So now you were going to prosecute me in this country because I'm participating. I gave some money for a cause. I sent some elastoplast for wounded. I'm assisted. I've fallen into the net of the foreign military assisted. I've fallen into it. I'm in it. And you're going to prosecute. And they have. They are prosecuting. The warrant clearly refers to Section 3 of the Foreign Military Assistance Act. So it's great. It's great when it's not a white person that you have to prosecute. And these Muslim buggers, yeah, time to... That's what the US wants. It wants it's a copy and paste prosecutions they've had in the UK, the US are all here. You know, when the terrorist legislation was introduced, we objected to it. It was a copy and paste of what the US wanted them to implement. This government is not independent of the US. It's not independent of Western powers. It's not independent of. It's not thinking. We're also going to be called the only democracy in Africa at some point, like Israel. So let's not negate the military solution. And I certainly want to take Martin on his offer. I'm going to set it all up and let's see if they prosecute us, Martin.
Thank you for that, Yousha. I think we've got about 12 or 13 minutes to go. Umayya, I'm going to start off with you and just to get some final thoughts, and possibly you'd like to add a comment or two on what some of the other panelists have said.
Yes, please. I definitely have quite a few closing comments to make if I can read my own notes. You know, in April, I was in occupied Palestine, in Jerusalem, and then we went to Hebron one day. And the local lady I was with said to me, "Do you realize you are 30 minutes away from Gaza?" And, you know, in that moment, you realize you're there, but you can still do nothing. And it's a very sad situation to be up and close with the delinquents in the IDF or IOF, and understand or witness their behavior. You know, they have documented their own crimes on multiple occasions, and we know that we've seen that the Grey Zone, I believe it is, has released a documentary called Atrocity Inc., where they showcase a lot of the really vile behavior of these kids, mocking women using their lingerie, playing with kids' toys, riding around on little children's bikes, all insulting, ridiculing behavior, which is, again, telling about the mentality we're dealing with. Then, you know, the world is upside down. It really is. You were talking about a couple in Durban that's in solitary confinement, and it looks like we're living in a time where if you call for the end to a genocide, you get into trouble. And if you participate in a genocide, you might just get away with it, because we actually have to, you know, this is up for discussion, which already is a problem, right? The answer to what should happen to someone who participates in the IDF should be very clear. It's wrong. It should be punished, not with a slap on the wrist. It's not a minor misdemeanor. It's a serious, serious war crime. And it's not just one person that someone has murdered, but multiple thousands of people that they have, you know, they have participated in a genocide. Call it what it is, and that's not up for discussion either anymore. Also, I just want to say regarding the media, being a journalist, I know how these things work. I know that journalists should not take sides, journalists should not be biased, journalists should do balanced reporting. But you know what? I'm sick of that, because there is no balanced reporting when it comes to genocide. Also, I hear people all the time referring to this situation as being complex. What's complex about it? Land was stolen, people are being murdered collectively, collective punishment, dehydration, starvation, the murder of little children and vulnerable women, pregnant women. 700 babies haven't lived to see their first birthday. I don't understand the complexity. We know it's about resources, about land, about greater Israel. They are telling us their plan, and yet we have the Arab kingdoms, Jordan and Saudi, playing ball with the Zionists. I mean, if you don't stop this now, parts of, well, already Syria, parts of Jordan, parts of Egypt will be taken into what they are planning, a greater Israel. And then regarding the ministers and, you know, the unions, at the end of the day, it seems everyone has a price. I was at the Israeli embassy, outside the Israeli embassy in Pretoria on Monday, the 7th of October, myself and 4 other women picketing. And they were having some sort of commemoration event for their hostages and the people who were killed on the 7th of October last year. And you know, the amount of abuse that we took from people leaving that event. The police had to intervene because I was attacked verbally and possibly even, well, I was attacked verbally, but possibly even physically. And again, this is someone who, like Aaron Bahak, is lunatic, indoctrinated lunatic. What are these people doing in this country? How do we tolerate these sort of people in this country? It's just not conducive to any kind of post-apartheid South Africa. So again, and I just want to say, you know, the rapper Loki said it best when he said, the best of humanity is being genocided by the worst of humanity, while the rest of humanity just looks on hopelessly and helplessly. Sadly, that is where we are, and I don't have any more words for what I am seeing. But yeah, Inaya, thank you for the opportunity to say what's on my mind.
Well, you summarized it so well in just a few words, Surveyor, in terms of what you've just said right at the end. Paul, just one final thought from you.
Just a thought about the limits of non-violent action and what armed action does. I mean, we're seeing in the Middle East itself the limits of Israeli military power against both, you know, Hamas and Palestine Islamic Jihad, where they claim, the IDF claims they've cleared an area, then has to go back into it. There's no one in that area except fighters are still there, and the attack from Hezbollah right into almost central Israel the other day on that military base also is another sign of that. Okay, and I think that is a major change in the balance of forces, which has a lot of dangerous further consequences if it escalates somewhere we wouldn't want it to go to world war. But at the same time, I think Israel's limitations, firstly militarily, secondly economically, and ultimately politically, are actually now quite stark. And I just wanted to pick up on your point that you ended off on, Yousha, and just make that as a conclusion, because that is the context in which we, as solidarity activists, are also operating.
Well, thank you for that, Paul. Martin, just some final thoughts, and also at the same time, just something to think about. We were in Cape Town. In fact, I was present at the event where Sheikh Riyad Fattar of the MGC made the comment, "I am Hamas," and we've seen the backlash that had come through as a result of that comment he had made in a public platform. But here again, when we're talking about someone serving in the IDF, killing people, and once again, the hypocrisy surrounding this obviously totally ignored. And also just, just your final thoughts on the discussion generally that we've been having.
Look, I think Palestine for a long time, and especially now, has kind of played the role of the political lighthouse of the world. And it's kind of shining, the light on politics in most parts of the world, including South Africa, and giving us some direction. The very issue that we're discussing now, the double standards, the hypocrisy, and so on, the racism inherent in the failure to prosecute these Zionist terrorists, South Africans, is indicative of that. And I mean, I just remember some years ago with the Fees Must Fall, there was the situation one night where the students were militantly protesting. They were threatened by the police. They were going to be attacked. And what the students did, the white students then said, okay, Let us go in front, and this will be a barrier to the black students from getting beaten up by the police, right? And it worked. That was the strange thing. It worked. The white students were in front, and the cops then backed off. They didn't beat the black students. And that, for me, is an indicator, and to the students at the time, that apartheid, right, has not been taken out of our body politic, our social political setup in South Africa, and is still alive and well in our government and in the state. And the organs of state continue to serve the interest of those forces, the powerful forces, the ruling classes of the apartheid era. And I think that we have to tackle, we have to challenge it head on in all spheres of the state, and literally by any means necessary, because we've already suffered for over 30 years with that, and we can't continue like this. And there are lots of other things. I mean, the state's austerity measures, for example, teachers being dismissed in their thousands in the Western Cape, etc., and we can go on. So our struggle in solidarity with Palestine is simultaneously a struggle about transformation, about social justice in South Africa and for most parts of the world as well. And that struggle must continue.
Well, it certainly must. And just some final thought from Yousha, and I've just got a message come through from another attorney, Sabir, just by making a comment that South Africa has got a poor record because there are members of our prosecution in the pockets of the Zio South Africans. These are the sentiments that have been expressed by Sabir, just by who is an attorney. And also, we are looking forward to Ziad Patel, who mentioned that the next 2 weeks, he would suggest that we dedicate a show once the executive summary is released on expansion of the terrorism, probe, and genocide bill. So, Yousha, just some final thought from you.
Yeah, I'm sorry that it became a bit emotional, but it is by our movement. I'm tired of this lawfare. I'm tired. I'm tired. I wish everybody well, journalists, social activists, but for me, the writings on the wall, I don't know. Everybody's been talking about Israel running out of money and Israel running out, and going on for a year now, all these solutions. So, yeah, I don't know. I'm tired, and I wish you well in advocating what you do. Jazakallah for the time. But I think my advocacy is now going to lean towards a military solution. I just don't see an option, whether it be against the perpetrators of the violence in that country or the double standard fork-tongued speakers in this country.
Well, Yousha, we're going to leave it at that. Paul Hendler, Umayya, Theba, Yousha, Tayob, and Martin Jansen, we thank you. We do appreciate you taking time out this evening, and all the best to all of you. And please take care.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yes, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to everyone. And once again, we want to thank our panelists this evening. And I'm sure, it's been most absorbing, but also a lot to think about, a lot that we've unpacked this evening in this discussion. But also, I think there's a lot of hard work that actually lies ahead as far as the solidarity with the Palestinian cause goes. And it's not only about being out on the streets, about picketing, about marching. Yes, it is necessary, but also looking at many other aspects. And as Yousha speaks about, very, very passionate about the whole question surrounding lawfare and also the inaction and the hypocrisy on the part of the authorities at times as well. Clearly, it is very, very demoralizing. But clearly, we need to still continue. We need to soldier on. We have a lot of hard work to do. And with that, I'm going to be leaving you with myself, from myself, Nightwadi, and the team here at Salam Media. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.